Now, at midday today, as part of the annual Holocaust Commemoration Day, 6 survivors will light a memorial candle and suggest how the memory of the tragedy can be taken forward. The 6 candles represent the 6 million Jews who died at the hands of Nazi Germany and collaborators during World War II. Meanwhile, UCT is also investigating comments made by an academic who said Adolf Hitler committed no crime. In a pre-recorded lecture shared online with first-year political science students, Wendy Kahn, a political studies lecturer, said that all Hitler did was to do what white people would normally have reserved for black people. Joining me now to take this discussion further is Wendy Kahn, South African Jewish Board of Deputies Director. Wendy, a very good morning to you. Thank you for joining us. Today, we know that South Africa joins the rest of the world in commemorating the lives of 6 million Jews, who died during this terrible ordeal. Let's talk about the significance of today and what it means to the Jewish community.
Yes, it's a very painful day for us, and it's especially painful because since the beginning of last year, we've lost 11 survivors in South Africa. And that's incredibly scary for us because we no longer have those people, or we've got so few left, of the people who can directly tell the stories and share their experiences from Holocaust. And that's something we need to be very worried about because, yes, it's the mourning and it's remembering and it's the pain that we experience, but it's also very important that we have those lessons that are coming out of the Holocaust, the lessons around hate, the lessons around speech and where irresponsible speech can lead people. And I think now more than ever, globally and in our own country, we are seeing lots of speech coming out. And as one of our survivors will share today, Marian Tursky, who lives in Poland today, and he will share how Auschwitz didn't come from the sky. It didn't start with the gas chambers. It started with irresponsible speech and offensive speech and hurtful speech and dangerous speech. And we need to be acutely aware and acutely vigilant around the type of speech that we are hearing around us, because it's dangerous. It can lead to really serious consequences, and we need to be aware.
You speak about speech and the dangers of what people say, irresponsible speech. We know that just recently what's really making news is a UCT lecturer who spoke during a lecture, Wendy Kahn, who said that all Hitler did was to do what white people had normally reserved for black people. As you heard those remarks, what message rang in your mind?
Well, the message rang in our mind that we need to be very careful about what comes out of our mouths, because it can bring such hurt and such offense to people around us. And we in South Africa should understand that. We come from a very painful past ourselves, and we understand that when these kind of outrageous statements are made, whether they're racist, whether they're anti-Semitic, whether they're homophobic or xenophobic, whatever they are, they cause a lot of damage and pain to people around us, and we need to stand up against that kind of speech, and we need to we can't allow it to continue.
What Wendy Kahn said was Hitler committed no crime, and I'd like us to expand on the crimes that came out of the horrific incident and, perhaps help us understand the horrors and the lasting legacies of genocides like the Holocaust.
Well, today we've got 6 survivors who are going to share their personal stories. 6 people who lost family members, who saw brothers and sisters being taken into gas chambers. We will hear stories from Ella Blumenthal, for example, who will talk about her 7 siblings who are no more, and the generations that have been lost to the world because those 7 people were exterminated in concentration camps. And those are the kind of stories that maybe this lecturer would take some time between 12 o'clock and 1 o'clock today to listen to. because they are very painful memories. And while we have survivors, we need to listen what comes out of their mouths, because we need to be able to continue those messages and continue those learnings. They are so important today more than ever. It's very interesting. This year, we have learners from around our country who will be reading names, and those names are relatives of people in South Africa, here, our own South African citizens, people that were lost to them in the Holocaust. This is very real. This is not something in history textbooks. This took place just over 75 years ago. And we need to learn from this. While we've still got these people who are sharing their personal stories, we need to be listening to them and learning from them and working out how we are going to take those messages forward. One of the survivors, Pinchas Gutta, who now lives in Canada, and he's going to share his story for us. But he has been very involved in technology and finding ways that through the use of technology, we can continue those stories and those memories and make it very real for people going forward.
And Wendy, as we try and break down, I mean, my first question, well, that part of the question was to answer the first bit of the sentiments and the words that came out of Lwazi Lushaba's mouth as he was in that lecture. And the second part says all Hitler did was to do to white people what white people had normally reserved for black people. What is your understanding of that sentence, as we try and look at all sensitivities and perhaps try and see, where this message was going, hurtful on one end and then speaking to another reality for a different group of people on the other end?
Yeah, we don't believe that it's useful to utilize one type of suffering to make comments about another type of suffering. That's not helpful. We need to look at each scenario and mourn each scenario and be concerned about each scenario in its own context. And I think what we've been incredibly worried about over the last few years is how easily words like Nazis and Holocaust and these kind of terms just slip off people's mouths. Concentration camps, gas chambers, these things need to be, we need to see them within the context that they were said and not be using them to make political points on other scenarios.
And how do you believe that, having the survivors speak about the horrors of the Holocaust and the impact on their lives, how do you believe that will move, us specifically as South Africa forward as we look at the current xenophobia and prejudice and racism that is experienced on a day-to-day basis?
The lessons of the Holocaust are immense, and they're around hate, and they're around allowing hate to grow and to flourish in our societies. As soon as we see any form of hate, we need to stand up against it. And wherever that hate is targeted, we need to be, we sit on the body, the Hate Crimes Working Group, of many different civil society organizations, from women's organizations, LGBTI organizations, refugee organizations, and we stand together against hate in our country, because it's irrelevant where the hate is targeted. We need to be able to stand up against it, and we cannot allow it to flourish in our society and in South Africa, particularly in South Africa. And the Hate Crimes Working Group, we've stood together, but it's time that legislation is brought into our parliament. And it's time that our courts are taking real action against the type of hatred that we're seeing around us. And that's what today is about. It's about saying, let's stand up together as South Africans against hatred, because this is, we can see from the Holocaust where unchallenged hate can end up.
And, the significance of today and the survivors who will be speaking, you speak about how they are only, well, they were 11 and those survivors are no longer alive. They've also lost their lives. Why is it so important to continue to hear these stories year after year as you commemorate this day and the significance of the people who were there to witness what happened?
Yeah. So there is nothing that can replace survivor testimony. To hear the personal experiences out of somebody's mouth and their reminiscences and their pain. I've watched these survivor testimonies and I've watched these people talking, and just watching their faces as they tell their stories, there is nothing that can replicate that. And that is, you know, we've really got so few left. And in these remaining years, we need to do everything that we can to learn from these people and to make sure that the lessons from their experiences are incorporated into our lives and the way that we, as South Africans, you know, view these kind of issues. I think, as I keep repeating what Marian Turski says, Auschwitz never dropped from the sky.
Wendy, very lastly, before we let you go, let's talk a little bit very briefly about how an incident like the Holocaust shaped the lives of the Jewish community in the manner in which they worship as religious people and the way that they live, the Jewish lifestyle. Yeah.
The Holocaust is very much a part of many of our lives. Many of us lost relatives in the Holocaust. It's something that really did frame Jewish communities around the world. It doesn't mean that we don't live active lives and dynamic lives, and certainly in South Africa we live very proudly as Jews, and there's great, our lives are very full, and we have many synagogues, many Jewish schools in the country, and we live very, very good Jewish lives in South Africa. But that pain remains, and that fear remains. And, you know, often when an anti-Semitic incident occurs, people will turn around and just say to us, get over it and just, you know, brush it off. We can't brush it off because we understand where anti-Semitism leads. And it's a fear that is in every one of us. And around the world, Jews live in fear. We've seen anti-Semitism rising internationally. We've seen attacks on Jewish synagogues. We've seen attacks on Jewish schools. And we've seen attacks until recently, actually this week, on Jewish people walking around European countries. There is a very real fear. And, you know, even in South Africa, you know, we are very vigilant in terms of our Jewish facilities to make sure that they are protected. And this is something, unfortunately, that's realistic, but it's something also that comes from a long history of great pain.
Very well. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Wendy Kahn, National Director of the South African Jewish Board of Deputies, speaking to us about Holocaust Commemoration Day in South Africa.